Every year, more than 1 billion people travel internationally. They visit ancient ruins, hike mountain trails, explore remote beaches, and photograph landscapes they have dreamed of seeing their entire lives. The vast majority return home safely, with memories and souvenirs. But a small number vanish, not in war zones or disaster areas, in popular tourist destinations, on well-marked trails, in broad daylight, sometimes within sight of other travelers. The cases we are about to examine are different from typical missing persons reports. These are not stories of inexperienced hikers who wandered off trail or tourists who underestimated dangerous conditions. These are cases where the evidence contradicts itself, where the timeline makes no sense, where the physical facts suggest events that should not be possible. A camera recovered with photographs taken in locations the missing person could not have reached. A kayak found overturned but completely dry inside. Footprints that walk into the center of an open field and simply stop. A diver who disappeared inside an underwater cave, but whose equipment was found outside, above water, with footage showing him exiting alive. These cases have been documented by police departments, search and rescue organizations, and investigative agencies across multiple countries. They involve tourists from different backgrounds, different ages, different levels of experience. The only thing they have in common is that conventional explanations do not fit the evidence. We have compiled 10 of the most disturbing and unexplained tourist disappearances from around the world. 10 cases where families are still waiting for answers. 10 mysteries that challenge our understanding of what can happen when people travel to unfamiliar places. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. What you are about to hear is not fiction. These events happened. These people vanished. And the evidence they left behind has never been explained. We begin on a small Greek island, where a British tourist went for a morning hike and was never seen again. His camera was recovered 3 days later. The photographs on it would become the central mystery of the investigation. The island of Amorgos is one of the easternmost islands in the Greek Cyclades, located in the Aegean Sea, approximately 170 miles southeast of Athens. The island is known for its dramatic cliffs, Byzantine monastery, and hiking trails that wind through rugged terrain with spectacular views of the sea. Unlike the more famous tourist destinations of Santorini or Mykonos, Amorgos attracts a quieter crowd: hikers, photographers, and travelers seeking authentic Greek island life away from the cruise ship crowds. The island has a permanent population of approximately 1,900 residents, spread across several small villages connected by narrow roads and ancient footpaths. Tourism is seasonal, concentrated in the summer months when ferries run more frequently from Athens and neighboring islands. The terrain is challenging. Steep cliffs drop hundreds of feet to the sea. Paths sometimes narrow to less than 2 feet wide, with sheer drops on either side. But the trails are well established and have been walked safely by thousands of visitors. Thomas Ashworth was 34 years old in August of 2019. He worked as a software developer in Manchester, England, and had traveled extensively throughout Europe and Asia. He was an experienced hiker who had completed multi-day treks in Scotland, Norway, and the Swiss Alps. His friends described him as careful, methodical, and physically fit. He ran marathons and competed in amateur cycling events. On August 12, 2019, Thomas arrived on Amorgos via ferry from Naxos. He checked into a small guest house in the village of Aegiali, on the northern end of the island. The owner, a woman named Katerina Papadopoulos, later told investigators that Thomas seemed relaxed and happy. He mentioned he planned to spend 4 days hiking the island trails and photographing the landscape. On the morning of August 13th, Thomas left the guest house at approximately 6:45. He told Katerina he was planning to hike to the monastery of Hosovio Tissa, a spectacular Byzantine structure built into the cliffs on the eastern side of the island. The hike from Aegiali to the monastery was approximately 7 miles, a moderate distance that most fit hikers complete in 3 to 4 hours. Thomas carried a day pack with water, snacks, sunscreen, and his camera equipment. He wore hiking boots, lightweight pants, and a blue long-sleeve shirt to protect against the sun. He told Katerina he expected to return by late afternoon. He never returned. When Thomas did not appear by 8 o'clock in the evening, Katerina became concerned. She tried calling his mobile phone, but received no answer. She contacted the local police station in Kora, the island's main village. Officer Dimitris Konstantinos took the report and began making inquiries. By the following morning, August 14th, a search operation was organized. The island's small police force was joined by volunteer hikers and members of the local Coast Guard. The trail from Egiali to the monastery was searched thoroughly. Teams checked every turnoff, every overlook, every location where a hiker might have stopped to rest or take photographs. At approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a search team found Thomas's day pack. It was sitting on a flat rock beside the trail at a location known locally as Stavros, approximately 4 miles from Egiali. The pack was upright, positioned as if someone had carefully set it down. Inside were Thomas's water bottle, half empty, his snacks unopened, his sunscreen, and his wallet containing cash and credit cards. His camera was not in the pack. The search intensified around the Stavros area. Teams spread out in all directions, checking the rocky terrain, the cliff edges, the dense patches of scrub vegetation where someone might have fallen or become trapped. Helicopters from the Greek Coast Guard flew patterns over the coastline, searching for any sign of a body in the water or on the rocks below. Nothing was found. On August 16th, 3 days after Thomas disappeared, a hiker from Germany named Klaus Weber made a discovery approximately 2 miles from where the backpack was found. He was walking a trail on the western side of the island, near a remote bay called Kalotaritisa, when he noticed something metallic glinting in the rocks. It was a camera, a Canon EOS digital SLR, the same model that Thomas Ashworth was known to carry. Klaus immediately reported the find to police. The camera was recovered and examined. The serial number confirmed it belonged to Thomas. The battery was dead, but when charged, the camera powered on normally. The memory card contained more than 200 photographs. Investigators began reviewing the images, hoping to reconstruct Thomas's movements and perhaps identify what had happened to him. What they found made no sense. The first photographs on the memory card were dated August 13th, beginning at 7:12 in the morning. They showed the trail from Egiali, the village growing smaller in the distance, the rocky landscape typical of the island's northern region. The images were time-stamped at regular intervals, suggesting Thomas stopped frequently to photograph the scenery. At 9:23 in the morning, according to the camera's timestamp, Thomas photographed the area around Stavros, the location where his backpack would later be found. The images showed the distinctive rock formation, the trail junction, the view toward the sea. Everything appeared normal. Then the photographs became impossible to explain. At 9:47 in the morning, less than 25 minutes after the Stavros photographs, the camera recorded an image of the monastery of Hozoviotisa. The monastery is located on the eastern side of the island, approximately 3 miles from Stavros. The terrain between these 2 points is extremely difficult, involving steep descents and ascents through rocky gorges. Even an experienced trail runner could not cover this distance in 25 minutes, but the photographs continued. At 10:15 in the morning, the camera recorded images of Kalotaritisa Bay on the western side of the island. This location is approximately 5 miles from the monastery, on the opposite side of Amorgos. Reaching it from the monastery would require crossing the island's mountainous spine, a journey that takes most hikers 4 to 5 hours. According to the timestamps, Thomas had covered this distance in 28 minutes. At 10:52, photographs showed the abandoned village of Arcasini in the island's interior. At 11:31, images captured the port of Catapola on the southern coast. At 12:17, the camera recorded the highest point on the island, a peak called Krikelos, that rises to nearly 630 meters and requires a strenuous 2-hour climb from any trailhead. In total, the camera contained photographs from 11 distinct locations spread across the entire island. According to the timestamps, all of these photographs were taken within a span of approximately 5 hours on the morning of August 13th. Covering this ground on foot would have taken a minimum of 2 full days of continuous hiking. Investigators initially suspected the camera's clock had malfunctioned. The timestamps must be wrong. But technical analysis of the camera revealed no defects. The internal clock was accurate. The metadata embedded in each image file was consistent and showed no signs of tampering. Some suggested that perhaps Thomas had used a vehicle, a motorcycle or scooter, to travel between locations. But the island's roads do not connect many of these points. Several locations, including the Krakelos summit, are accessible only on foot, and no one reported seeing Thomas or any vehicle on the island's small network of roads that day. Others proposed that the photographs might have been taken over multiple days, with the camera's date settings incorrect. But the lighting conditions in the photographs were consistent with a single morning, with the sun rising and moving across the sky in the expected progression. Weather records confirmed that August 13th was clear and sunny, matching the images. August 14th brought cloud cover that was not visible in any of the photographs. The final photograph on the camera was time-stamped at 12:44 in the afternoon. It showed a rocky coastline that investigators were never able to identify. The image was slightly blurred, as if the camera had been moving when the shutter was pressed. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, was what appeared to be a shadow. Analysis of the image could not determine if this was a person, a rock formation, or simply an artifact of the lighting. Thomas Ashworth has been missing for 6 years. His body has never been found. The Greek authorities officially closed the active investigation in 2021, classifying the case as an unexplained disappearance, likely death by misadventure. But the photographs remain unexplained. His family in Manchester has hired private investigators and consulted with photography experts, trying to understand what the camera recorded. No one has been able to explain how Thomas could have taken photographs at locations spread across the entire island in a time frame that would have required impossible physical feats. His mother, Patricia Ashworth, has visited Amorgos twice since her son's disappearance. She has walked the trails he photographed, stood at the locations where his camera recorded images. She has no explanation for what happened. She knows only that her son went hiking on a Greek island, that his backpack was found carefully placed on a rock, that his camera was discovered 2 miles away with photographs that defy logic, and that Thomas himself has never been found. What happened on Amorgos on August 13th, 2019? How did Thomas's camera record photographs from locations across the island in a time frame that was physically impossible? What was in that final blurred photograph? Where is Thomas Ashworth? We do not know. If these cases are making you question what you thought you knew about the world, subscribe now and turn on notifications. We have 9 more disappearances to cover, and each one is stranger than the last. The next case takes us to the mountains of Peru, where a group of tourists visited one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world. One member of the group fell behind for just 2 minutes. What happened next has never been explained. Machu Picchu needs no introduction. The 15th century Incan citadel, perched nearly 8,000 feet above sea level in the Andes Mountains, is one of the most visited tourist destinations in the world. More than 1.5 million people visit the site annually, walking the ancient stone paths, photographing the iconic terraces, and marveling at the engineering achievement of a civilization that built this complex without wheels or iron tools. The site is carefully managed by the Peruvian Ministry of Culture. Visitors must enter with licensed guides during designated time slots. Trails are clearly marked. Rangers patrol the grounds throughout the day. It is considered one of the safest archaeological sites in South America. The town of Aguas Calientes, at the base of the mountain, serves as the staging area for visits to Machu Picchu. Tourists arrive by train from Cusco or on foot via the famous Inca Trail. From Aguas Calientes, buses wind up the mountain road to the site entrance, or visitors can climb the steep stone stairway that ascends directly from the town. On the morning of July 19th, 2021, a group of 8 tourists from Australia gathered in Aguas Calientes for their scheduled visit to Machu Picchu. The group consisted of 4 married couples, all in their late 20s and early 30s, who had been traveling together through South America for 3 weeks. They had visited Buenos Aires, crossed into Chile, flown to Lima, and traveled to Cusco before making their way to Machu Picchu. The group included Michael and Jennifer Torres, both 31, from Sydney; Daniel and Rebecca Shaw, 29 and 28, from Melbourne; Andrew and Lisa Pemberton, 32 and 30, from Brisbane; and Nathan and Sophie Caldwell, 28 and 27, also from Sydney. All 8 were experienced travelers. Several had hiked in challenging terrain before. They were fit, healthy, and excited to visit a site they had dreamed of seeing for years. Their guide, a Peruvian man named Carlos Gutierrez, who had been leading tours to Machu Picchu for more than 15 years, met them at their hotel at 5:30 in the morning. They took the first bus up the mountain, arriving at the site entrance at approximately 6:20. The early morning light cast long shadows across the ancient stones. Mist clung to the peaks. Conditions were perfect for photography. For the next 3 hours, Carlos led the group through the site, explaining the history, pointing out architectural details, and posing them for photographs at the most scenic viewpoints. Everything proceeded normally. The group stayed together, following Carlos along the designated paths, asking questions, and taking hundreds of photographs. At approximately 9:45, the group reached an area known as the Intipunku, or Sun Gate, located on a ridge above the main citadel. This is the point where hikers completing the Inca Trail get their first view of Machu Picchu. It offers spectacular panoramic views and is a popular spot for photographs. Carlos gathered the group for a rest break. They sat on the stone terraces, drinking water and snacking on the provisions they had brought. The morning had warmed considerably, and several members of the group removed outer layers of clothing. Nathan Caldwell, the youngest man in the group, mentioned that he wanted to photograph a particular stone structure located approximately 100 feet back along the trail they had just walked. He had noticed it as they passed, but had not stopped. Sophie, his wife, said she would wait with the group. Nathan stood, grabbed his camera, and walked back down the trail. Jennifer Torres watched him go. She later told investigators that Nathan walked at a normal pace, not hurrying, occasionally glancing at his camera to check settings. He reached a bend in the trail and disappeared from view. 2 minutes passed. Carlos began preparing to continue the tour. Sophie asked if someone should go check on Nathan, as he had been gone longer than expected. Daniel Shaw volunteered to walk back and hurry him along. Daniel walked to the bend in the trail where Nathan had disappeared from view. He rounded the corner and stopped. Nathan was not there. The trail at this point runs straight for approximately 200 feet before curving again. There were no turnoffs, no side paths, no structures where someone could be hidden from view. Daniel could see the entire length of the trail. Nathan was not on it. Daniel called Nathan's name. No response. He walked the full length of the visible trail, checking behind every rock, every bush, every possible hiding spot. Nothing. He ran back to the group and reported that Nathan was gone. Carlos immediately tried to contact park rangers via his radio. The group spread out, with some members retracing the path they had walked while others checked the terraces and structures nearby. Within 20 minutes, park rangers had arrived and begun a systematic search. Within an hour, more than 30 personnel were combing the area around the Sun Gate, checking every trail, every terrace, every possible location where a person could have gone. Nathan Caldwell had vanished in the 2 minutes between walking away from the group and Daniel Shaw going to check on him. The search continued for 6 days. Rangers checked every section of Machu Picchu and the surrounding mountain terrain. Teams descended into the valley below the Sun Gate, checking the steep forested slopes where someone might have fallen. Helicopters flew patterns over the area. Local villagers were enlisted to search trails and paths throughout the region. On the 3rd day of the search, a ranger named Miguel Quispe made a discovery that would add a disturbing dimension to the mystery. Approximately 300 meters above the Sun Gate, on a rocky outcropping that rises sharply from the ridge, Miguel found Nathan's backpack. The outcropping is not accessible by any trail. It requires technical rock climbing to reach, with near vertical sections and loose rock, that makes ascent extremely dangerous. Even experienced climbers with proper equipment would consider it a challenging ascent. Nathan had no climbing experience. He was wearing hiking shoes, not climbing boots. He carried no ropes, no harnesses, no climbing equipment of any kind, and he had been out of sight for only 2 minutes. The backpack was examined thoroughly. Inside were Nathan's water bottle, his sunscreen, his wallet with cash and credit cards, and the camera he had taken to photograph the stone structure. The camera contained photographs from the morning, ending with an image of Sophie at the sun gate, time-stamped at 9:42, 3 minutes before Nathan walked away from the group. There were no additional photographs, nothing showing how Nathan had reached the outcropping, nothing showing what had happened to him. The outcropping itself was examined by climbing specialists. They found no evidence of how anyone could have ascended the rock face in the time available. The rock was loose and crumbling in places. A fall from the steep sections would almost certainly be fatal and would leave visible marks on the vegetation and rock below. No such marks were found. The investigation interviewed all members of the Australian group multiple times. Their accounts were consistent. Nathan had walked away from the group at approximately 9:45. Daniel had gone to look for him at approximately 9:47. In that 2-minute window, Nathan had somehow traveled from the trail to a rocky outcropping 300 meters above, a journey that would take an experienced climber with full equipment at least 45 minutes to an hour. Some investigators suggested that Nathan might have been planning to disappear. Perhaps he had arranged for someone to meet him, to help him escape his life and start over elsewhere. But this theory quickly fell apart under scrutiny. Nathan had no financial problems. His marriage was by all accounts happy. He had a successful career as an architect in Sydney. He had made plans with colleagues for projects extending months into the future. He had a return flight booked and had been excitedly discussing plans for the rest of the South America trip. His phone and credit cards have never been used since that day. There has been no contact with any family members or friends, no sightings, no tips, no evidence that Nathan Caldwell is alive anywhere in the world. Sophie Caldwell remained in Peru for 3 weeks, working with investigators and participating in the search. She eventually returned to Australia, devastated and without answers. She has not remarried. She has told friends that she cannot move on without knowing what happened to her husband. Nathan Caldwell has been missing for 4 years. The Peruvian authorities have classified the case as an unexplained disappearance. His body has never been found. His backpack, recovered from the impossible location above the Sun Gate, is held as evidence in Cusco. The stone structure that Nathan walked away to photograph still stands along the trail at Machu Picchu. Thousands of tourists pass it every month, taking pictures just as Nathan intended to do. Most of them have never heard his story. They do not know that a young Australian man walked toward this spot, disappeared in 2 minutes, and left his belongings 300 meters up a cliff face that no one can explain how he climbed. What happened to Nathan Caldwell on July 19, 2021? How did his backpack reach an inaccessible location 300 meters above where he was last seen? Why would he leave all his belongings behind? Where is Nathan now? We do not know. The patterns you are seeing in these cases are not coincidental. Equipment found in impossible locations. Timelines that defy physics. Experienced people vanishing in popular, well-traveled areas. These elements appear again and again in the cases we will examine. Our next story takes us to the frozen landscapes of Iceland, where a Canadian photographer disappeared while documenting the northern lights. What searchers found would raise more questions than answers. Iceland has become one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world over the past 2 decades. The island nation, located in the North Atlantic between Europe and North America, offers landscapes unlike anywhere else on Earth. Volcanic craters, massive glaciers, thundering waterfalls, black sand beaches, and during the winter months, the spectacular aurora borealis dancing across the night sky. The country is sparsely populated, with approximately 370,000 residents, most concentrated in the capital city of Reykjavik. Outside the urban areas, Iceland is wild and remote. Vast stretches of lava fields, highlands that are inaccessible for much of the year, and coastlines battered by North Atlantic storms. The beauty is matched by the danger. Weather can change rapidly. Temperatures can drop precipitously. The terrain hides hazards including hot springs that can cause severe burns, crevasses in glaciers, and unstable volcanic rock. Despite these dangers, or perhaps because of them, Iceland attracts nearly 2 million visitors annually. Many come specifically to photograph the northern lights, which are visible from September through March when the nights are long and dark. Photographers set up tripods in remote locations, waiting for the sky to come alive with green, purple, and white ribbons of light. Emma Lindqvist was 37 years old in February of 2020. She was a professional nature photographer based in Vancouver, Canada, whose work had appeared in National Geographic, Outdoor Photography, and numerous other publications. She specialized in capturing extreme landscapes and celestial phenomena. She had photographed the northern lights in Canada, Norway, and Finland. Iceland was the next destination on her list. Emma arrived in Reykjavik on February 8, 2020. She rented a four-wheel drive vehicle equipped for winter conditions and spent 2 days photographing sites near the capital. On February 11th, she drove north along the Ring Road, heading toward the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, known for its dramatic coastal scenery and dark skies ideal for aurora photography. She checked into a small guest house in the village of Grundarfjordur that evening. The owner, a man named Olafur Sigurdsson, remembered Emma as friendly and professional. She asked about the best locations for photographing the northern lights and mentioned she planned to drive to a remote beach called Skardsvik, approximately 20 miles west of the village. Olafur warned her about the conditions. The beach was isolated, the roads were icy, and the weather forecast predicted strong winds later that night. Emma thanked him for his concern, but said she was experienced with winter photography. She had the proper equipment and would be careful. Emma left the guest house at approximately 9 o'clock in the evening. The aurora forecast was favorable. Clear skies and moderate geomagnetic activity suggested the lights would be visible. She never returned. When Emma did not appear for breakfast the following morning, Olafur initially assumed she had slept in after a late night of photography. By noon, when she still had not returned, he became concerned. He drove to the parking area at Skardsvik Beach. Emma's rental vehicle was there, parked at the edge of the gravel lot. The engine was cold. The doors were locked. Through the windows, Olafur could see her suitcase in the back seat. He called the police immediately. Officers from the Stykkishólmur Police Department arrived within the hour. They unlocked the vehicle and examined its contents. Emma's suitcase contained clothing, toiletries, and personal items. Her laptop was on the front seat. Her passport and wallet were in the center console. Her camera equipment was missing. Her tripod was missing. Her winter coat and boots, which she would have been wearing, were not in the vehicle. Officers searched the beach and the surrounding area. Skardsvik is a small cove with a black sand beach backed by cliffs of volcanic rock. In winter, the beach is often deserted. The nearest houses are several miles away. At the high tide line, officers found Emma's tripod. It was set up, legs extended, as if ready for use. The camera mounting plate was attached, but no camera was present. The tripod was positioned facing north, toward the ocean, and the direction where the northern lights would have been visible. There were footprints in the sand, leading from the parking area to the tripod location. The prints matched the boots Emma had been wearing. Officers followed the footprints from the parking lot to the tripod, a distance of approximately 100 meters. Then they followed the footprints from the tripod toward the water. The prints led across the beach in a straight line. They did not wander. They did not turn. They walked directly toward the surf. At the waterline, they stopped. Officers searched the water's edge, looking for any sign that Emma had entered the ocean. The tide had come and gone since the previous night, which would have erased any evidence at the immediate waterline. But the surf at Skardsvik is cold and rough. If someone entered the water, even accidentally, survival would be measured in minutes. The Icelandic Coast Guard launched a search of the coastal waters. Boats patrolled the area. A helicopter flew patterns along the coastline. Divers checked the immediate offshore area. No body was found. The search continued for 8 days, expanding to cover the coastline for miles in both directions. Volunteer teams walked the cliffs and beaches, looking for any sign of Emma. Nothing was found. No body, no clothing, no camera equipment other than the tripod. The investigation considered several possibilities. The most obvious was that Emma had accidentally entered the water, perhaps while trying to photograph waves or a particularly dramatic section of coastline. The North Atlantic in February is deadly cold. She would have become incapacitated within minutes. But this explanation did not account for the footprints. They led in a straight line to the water's edge. They showed no signs of stumbling, slipping, or struggling. They walked with purpose directly into the surf. Suicide was considered. Emma had no known history of depression or mental illness. She had upcoming photography assignments booked. She had been in regular contact with family and friends, giving no indication of distress. Her phone, recovered from the vehicle, showed text messages sent to her sister the previous evening expressing excitement about the aurora forecast. The third possibility, and the one that most troubled investigators, was that something had drawn Emma into the water. But what? And why would an experienced outdoor professional walk willingly into deadly cold surf? 6 weeks after Emma's disappearance, her camera was found. A farmer named Gunnar Bjornsson was walking along a remote section of coastline, approximately 15 miles from Skardsvik Beach. He was checking on sheep that grazed the coastal areas and had no connection to the search for Emma. On a rocky ledge, approximately 30 meters above the surf, he found a camera. It was Emma's Canon EOS R5, identified by serial number. The camera was damaged but partially functional. The memory card was intact. Investigators downloaded the images from the memory card. The photographs began on February 8th, showing locations around Reykjavik that matched Emma's known movements. They continued through her journey north, documenting the landscapes along the Ring Road. The final photographs were dated February 11th, the night Emma disappeared. The images showed the northern lights over Skardsvik Beach. The aurora was spectacular that night, green ribbons of light arcing across the sky. Emma had captured dozens of stunning photographs, the kind of images that would have been highlights of her portfolio. The timestamps showed the photographs were taken between approximately 10:30 and 11:45 in the evening. The final aurora photograph was timestamped at 11:47. Then there was one more image, timestamped at 11:52, 5 minutes after the last aurora photograph. The camera had captured something else. The image was dark, partially blurred, and difficult to interpret. It appeared to show the beach, the sand visible in the lower portion of the frame. The ocean was visible in the background, dark and indistinct, and in the center of the frame, there appeared to be a figure. The figure was not clearly defined. It might have been a person. It might have been a rock formation or a trick of the light. Analysis of the image could not definitively determine what it showed, but several investigators noted that the figure, if it was a figure, appeared to be standing in or just above the water, approximately 50 meters from shore. The camera showed no further images. Whatever happened after 11:52, Emma did not photograph it. The camera's location raised additional questions. It was found 15 miles from where Emma disappeared, on a rocky ledge 30 meters above the surf. The coastline between Skardsvik and this location is rugged and largely inaccessible. There are no roads, only clifftop paths that are dangerous in winter conditions. How did the camera travel 15 miles from the beach where Emma was last seen? The ocean currents in this area flow in a different direction. An object dropped in the water at Skardsvik would not naturally drift to where the camera was found. Some suggested the camera might have been carried by a person. Perhaps Emma herself had walked along the coast before eventually entering the water somewhere else. But the footprints at Skardsvik led directly into the surf. There were no footprints leading away from the beach. Emma Lindqvist has been missing for 5 years. Her body has never been recovered. The Icelandic police have classified the case as a presumed drowning, though the exact circumstances remain unexplained. Her sister has the camera and the memory card. She has looked at the final photograph hundreds of times, trying to understand what her sister might have seen in those last moments. She cannot explain the figure in the image. She cannot explain how the camera traveled 15 miles to a cliff 30 meters above the sea. She knows only that her sister walked to the water's edge on a frozen February night and never came back. She knows that the footprints did not stumble or wander. She knows that something drew Emma Lindqvist into the North Atlantic, and the camera captured one final image that no one can explain. What did Emma see on the beach that night? What is the figure in the final photograph? How did her camera travel 15 miles to a location it could not have reached by natural means? Where is Emma Lindqvist? We do not know. We have now examined 3 cases from 3 different continents. A British tourist in Greece whose camera recorded photographs from locations across an entire island in impossible timeframes. An Australian man in Peru who disappeared in 2 minutes and left his belongings on an inaccessible cliff 300 meters above where he was last seen. A Canadian photographer in Iceland who walked into the sea, leaving behind a camera that would travel to an impossible location and reveal one final, unexplainable image. The patterns are becoming clear. Equipment found in impossible locations, timelines that defy physics, and in each case, a final piece of evidence that raises more questions than it answers. In Part 2, we will examine 4 more cases. A diver in Mexico who disappeared inside an underwater cave, but whose equipment was found outside, above water, with footage showing him alive and exiting. A family in the Australian outback whose car was found running with all their belongings inside, but whose footprints led in 4 different directions before simply stopping. A Japanese forest where a tourist's GPS recorded movements that should have been impossible, and a Norwegian fjord where a kayaker vanished, leaving behind a kayak that was overturned but completely dry inside. Subscribe now if you have not already. Turn on notifications so you do not miss Part 2, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on these cases. What do you think happened to Thomas Ashworth on Amorgos? How did Nathan Caldwell's backpack reach that cliff? What was in Emma Lindqvist's final photograph? We read every comment. Some of you have traveled to these places. Some of you have experienced things you cannot explain. Share your stories. You might not be alone. If you have not seen Part 1, stop now and go watch it. These cases build on each other, and you need to understand the patterns before we continue. In Part 1, we examined 3 disappearances that left behind evidence no one could explain. Thomas Ashworth, a British tourist in Greece whose camera recorded photographs from locations across an entire island in time frames that were physically impossible. Nathan Caldwell, an Australian man who vanished at Machu Picchu in 2 minutes and left his backpack on an inaccessible cliff 300 meters above where he was last seen. Emma Lindqvist, a Canadian photographer in Iceland who walked into the sea, leaving footprints that showed no hesitation, and a camera that would later be found 15 miles away with one final unexplainable image. 3 cases, 3 continents, 3 sets of evidence that contradict everything we think we understand about what can happen to people in unfamiliar places. The cases we will cover in this video add new dimensions to these patterns. One involves a diver who disappeared inside an underwater cave, but whose equipment was found outside, above water, with footage showing him alive and exiting safely. Another involves a family whose car was found running in the Australian outback, with all their belongings inside, but whose footprints led in 4 different directions before simply stopping. The third involves a Japanese forest where a tourist's GPS recorded movements that should have been impossible. And the fourth involves a kayaker in Norway who vanished from a fjord, leaving behind a kayak that was overturned but completely dry inside. After we cover these cases, the patterns will become impossible to ignore. Something is happening to tourists in remote places around the world, something that does not fit any conventional explanation. Let us continue. The Yucatan Peninsula in southeastern Mexico is home to one of the most extensive underwater cave systems in the world. Beneath the jungle floor lies a labyrinth of flooded passages, chambers, and tunnels carved through limestone over millions of years. The ancient Maya considered these cenotes, natural sinkholes that provide access to the underground rivers, to be sacred portals to the underworld. Modern divers consider them some of the most spectacular and dangerous diving environments on Earth. The cave systems near the resort town of Tulum have become a major destination for experienced divers from around the world. The water is crystal clear, with visibility often exceeding 100 meters. Sunlight penetrates the shallow sections, creating ethereal beams of light through the blue water. The deeper passages lead into permanent darkness, requiring specialized equipment, training, and experience. Cave diving is not for beginners. The environment is unforgiving. Divers must manage air supply, buoyancy, navigation, and equipment in conditions where a single mistake can be fatal. Getting lost in the maze of passages, running out of air, or becoming entangled in guidelines are constant risks. Statistics suggest that cave diving has one of the highest fatality rates of any recreational activity. Despite these dangers, thousands of certified divers visit the Yucatan Caves every year. The vast majority complete their dives safely, returning with footage and memories of otherworldly beauty. The dive operations in the region are professional and safety-focused. Accidents happen, but they are rare given the volume of divers passing through. The case of Marcus Chen does not fit the pattern of a typical cave diving accident. Marcus was 42 years old in March of 2022. He was a dive instructor from San Diego, California, with more than 2,000 logged dives and extensive cave diving certification. He had dived the Yucatan Caves more than 50 times over the past decade. He knew the systems intimately. He had taught other divers how to navigate them safely. On March 15, 2022, Marcus was diving in a system called Dos Ojos, one of the most popular cave systems in the region. He was accompanied by two other experienced divers, both Americans, named David Reyes and Christina Hartman. All three had dived Dos Ojos multiple times before. They were familiar with the passages, the navigation, and the potential hazards. The group entered the water at approximately 10 o'clock in the morning. They planned a moderate penetration dive, following the main passage for approximately 400 meters before turning back. Total dive time was estimated at 75 to 90 minutes. All three carried redundant equipment, multiple lights, and sufficient air supply for the planned dive plus reserve. The first portion of the dive proceeded normally. David later described the conditions as perfect. Clear water, no current, excellent visibility. The group maintained proper spacing, with Marcus leading, Christina in the middle, and David at the rear. They followed the permanent guideline installed in the cave, staying within the established route. At approximately 35 minutes into the dive, the group reached a junction where the main passage split into two branches. They had planned to take the left branch, which led to a large chamber popular for photography. Marcus paused at the junction, checked his equipment, and signaled that he was continuing. Then something happened that David and Christina struggled to explain. David was approximately 15 meters behind Marcus, maintaining standard spacing. He watched Marcus begin to move into the left passage. Then Marcus stopped. His body language changed. He appeared to be looking at something in the passage ahead, though David could not see what had caught his attention. Marcus turned around. He looked directly at David. Then he raised his hand and gave the signal for "okay," indicating everything was fine. Then Marcus swam into the right passage instead of the left. David was confused. They had planned to go left. The right passage was more complex, with tighter restrictions and less room to maneuver. It was not part of their dive plan. He signaled to Christina, pointing toward Marcus. She had also seen him turn right. They followed. The right passage narrowed quickly. David could see Marcus's fins ahead, kicking steadily as he moved deeper into the cave. David tried to signal him to stop, flashing his light in the standard attention pattern. Marcus did not respond. He continued swimming. After approximately 50 meters, the passage became too narrow for comfortable diving. David made the decision to turn back. Going further would exceed the safe limits of their dive plan. He signaled Christina, and they began their exit. They assumed Marcus would realize his mistake and turn back to join them. He was an experienced diver. He would not push beyond safe limits. David and Christina completed their exit and surfaced at approximately 11:30 in the morning. They waited at the cenote entrance for Marcus to appear. He did not. After 30 minutes of waiting, David contacted the dive operation manager. A search was initiated immediately. Experienced cave divers entered the system, following Marcus's likely route into the right passage. They found his equipment. Approximately 80 meters into the right passage, in a small chamber where the passage widened slightly, searchers found Marcus's primary dive light, his backup light, and his dive computer. The items were resting on a rock ledge, positioned as if carefully placed rather than dropped. The lights were turned off. The dive computer showed that Marcus had been at this location at approximately 10:52, roughly 50 minutes into the dive. Marcus himself was not there. The searchers continued deeper into the passage. It narrowed further, then opened into another chamber, then narrowed again. They searched every branch, every side passage, every possible location where a diver could have gone. They found nothing. The search continued for 4 days. Specialist cave diving recovery teams were brought in from the United States. The entire right passage system was mapped and searched systematically. Every meter was covered. Marcus Chen was not in the cave. The investigation could not explain how this was possible. The right passage had only one entrance, the junction where Marcus had turned away from the group. The passage did not connect to any other entrance or exit. It was a dead-end system. If Marcus had entered the passage, as David and Christina witnessed, he should have been inside it. His equipment was found inside, but Marcus was not. Then came the discovery that transformed this case from a mystery into something far stranger. Marcus's underwater camera was found with his other equipment on the rock ledge. The camera had been recording video during the dive. Investigators downloaded the footage, hoping to understand what had happened in those final minutes. The footage showed the dive proceeding normally. The crystal-clear water of Dos Ojos, the guideline stretching into the blue distance, the silhouettes of David and Christina behind Marcus. At the junction, the camera captured Marcus pausing, looking into the left passage. Then the camera captured Marcus, turning and swimming into the right passage. The footage continued as he moved deeper into the narrowing tunnel. At approximately 52 minutes on the dive timer, Marcus reached the chamber where his equipment would later be found. The footage showed Marcus stopping in the chamber. He appeared to look around, as if examining the space. Then he did something unexpected. He removed his equipment. On camera, Marcus carefully took off his buoyancy compensator, his tanks, his weight belt. He set them on the rock ledge with obvious deliberation. Then he removed his dive computer and both lights and placed them alongside. Then Marcus swam away from the camera, deeper into the passage, wearing only his wetsuit and mask. The footage continued recording for another 18 minutes before the camera's battery died. During this time, the camera remained on the rock ledge, pointed toward the passage where Marcus had disappeared. The passage remained empty. Marcus didn't return. Investigators were baffled. No diver would voluntarily remove life support equipment inside a cave. Without air supply, Marcus would have drowned within minutes. The passage he swam into was too narrow and too long to exit on a single breath. It was suicide. But the footage showed something else that investigators could not explain. At approximately minute 63 on the recording, 7 minutes before the battery died, something appeared at the edge of the frame. It was brief, lasting only about 4 seconds. A figure moving through the water at the far end of the passage, heading back toward the chamber. The figure appeared to be Marcus, same wetsuit, same build, moving with purpose, swimming toward the camera. Then the figure turned and swam upward, toward what appeared to be a shaft of light above the passage. There is no shaft of light in that section of cave. There is no exit. The passage is completely enclosed, with solid rock above. But the footage clearly shows a figure swimming upward, toward light, and disappearing from frame. The camera recorded for 4 more minutes after this. Nothing else appeared. Investigators have analyzed the footage extensively. Some suggest the figure was a reflection, a trick of light, a video artifact. But the movement is consistent with a swimming person. The direction is purposeful, and the light the figure swam toward should not exist. 3 days after the search in the cave was suspended, Marcus's wetsuit was found. It was hanging from a tree branch at another cenote, approximately 3 kilometers from Dos Ojos. The cenote, called Cenote Escondido, has no known connection to the Dos Ojos system. The passages have been mapped. They do not connect. The wetsuit was identified as Marcus's by the custom patches sewn onto the sleeves. It was wet but not waterlogged, as if it had been out of the water for several hours. There was no body inside, just the empty wetsuit, hanging from a branch as if someone had placed it there to dry. Marcus Chen has been missing for 3 years. His body has never been recovered. The cave where he removed his equipment has been searched repeatedly. He is not there. The cenote where his wetsuit was found has been searched. He is not there either. His wife, Linda, has watched the footage from his camera more times than she can count. She has paused on the frame, showing the figure swimming toward the light. She cannot explain what her husband saw in that cave. She cannot explain how his wetsuit traveled 3 kilometers through solid rock to a different cenote. She knows only that Marcus entered a passage with one entrance, removed his equipment on camera, swam away, and was never seen again. She knows that something appeared on the footage, swimming toward a light that should not exist. She knows that his wetsuit was found in a location he could not have reached. What did Marcus Chen see in that cave that made him remove his equipment? What was the light the figure swam toward? How did his wetsuit travel through solid rock to another cenote? Where is Marcus now? We do not know. If these cases are challenging your understanding of what is possible, you are not alone. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. We have more disappearances to cover, and each one defies explanation. The next case takes us to the Australian outback, where a family of 4 disappeared from their vehicle in the middle of nowhere. What searchers found when they examined the scene has never been explained. The Australian outback covers more than 2.5 million square miles of the continent's interior. It is one of the most sparsely populated regions on Earth, with vast stretches where the nearest human settlement may be hundreds of miles away. The landscape varies from red desert to scrubland to rocky ranges that stretch to the horizon. Temperatures can exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. Water sources are scarce and unreliable. Thousands of tourists drive through the outback every year, following the sealed highways that connect major cities or venturing onto the unsealed tracks that lead to remote attractions. Most complete their journeys safely. But the outback is unforgiving. Vehicles break down. People underestimate distances. Water runs out. The emergency services have responded to countless situations where tourists found themselves stranded in conditions they were not prepared for. The Stuart Highway runs north to south through the center of Australia, connecting Darwin on the northern coast to Adelaide in the south. The highway passes through some of the most remote territory on the continent, with stretches of hundreds of miles between service stations. Drivers are advised to carry extra fuel, water, and emergency supplies. Mobile phone coverage is non-existent for most of the route. On September 23, 2020, the Morrison family departed Alice Springs, heading north on the Stuart Highway toward Darwin. The family consisted of Paul Morrison, 45, a civil engineer from Brisbane, his wife Rebecca, 43, a primary school teacher, and their 2 children, Sophie, 14, and James, 11. They were on a 3-week driving holiday, having already visited Uluru and Kings Canyon before reaching Alice Springs. The family was traveling in a rented Toyota Land Cruiser, a vehicle well suited to outback conditions. They had camping gear, a satellite phone for emergencies, sufficient fuel, and more than enough water for the journey. Paul had driven in remote Australian conditions before and understood the precautions necessary for outback travel. They left Alice Springs at approximately 7 o'clock in the morning, planning to reach the town of Tennant Creek, approximately 300 miles north, by early afternoon. Rebecca sent a text message to her sister in Brisbane at 7:15, reporting their departure and expressing excitement about the next leg of their journey. The family never arrived in Tennant Creek. When Paul did not check in that evening as planned, Rebecca's sister became concerned. She tried calling the satellite phone. No answer. She contacted the Northern Territory Police, who began making inquiries. The following morning, A road train driver named Colin Peters reported seeing an abandoned vehicle on a remote section of the Stewart Highway, approximately 180 miles north of Alice Springs. The vehicle, a white Toyota Land Cruiser, was parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights on. Police reached the vehicle at approximately 11 o'clock in the morning on September 24th. What they found would become one of the most puzzling missing persons cases in Australian history. The Land Cruiser was unlocked. The engine was running. The fuel tank was nearly full. The air conditioning was on, keeping the interior cool against the building heat of the day. Inside the vehicle, everything appeared normal. The family's luggage was in the back. Rebecca's handbag was on the front passenger seat, containing her wallet, phone, and identification. Paul's phone was in the center console. The children's tablets and books were scattered on the back seat. The satellite phone was in the glove compartment, fully charged and functioning. It had not been used since leaving Alice Springs. The camping gear was secure. The water supply was untouched. The emergency kit was complete. 4 people had been in this vehicle. 4 people had stopped on the side of the highway. 4 people had gotten out, leaving everything behind, and had not returned. Officers immediately began searching the surrounding area. The terrain was flat scrubland stretching to the horizon in all directions. There were no structures, no landmarks, nothing but sparse vegetation and red earth. And there were footprints. The footprints began at the vehicle's doors. 2 sets of adult prints, 2 sets of children's prints. The family had exited the vehicle on the driver's side, away from the highway. But here is where the evidence became impossible to explain. The footprints did not stay together. From the vehicle, 4 sets of prints walked approximately 50 meters into the scrubland. Then they separated. Paul's prints, identified by the distinctive tread of his hiking boots, turned and headed north. Rebecca's prints turned south. Sophie's prints headed east. James's prints headed west. 4 family members, 4 different directions, walking away from each other into the empty outback. Officers followed each set of prints as far as possible. Paul's footprints continued north for approximately 200 meters. Then they stopped. Not at a rock or a road or any obstruction. They simply ended in the middle of open ground. The last print was complete, showing the full sole of his boot. There was no disturbance in the dirt, no indication of a struggle or a fall. The prints just stopped. Rebecca's footprints continued south for approximately 170 meters before stopping in identical fashion. Complete, final print. No disturbance, no explanation. Sophie's prints headed east for approximately 220 meters. Same result. The prints ended in open ground with no indication of where she had gone. James's prints were the shortest, continuing west for approximately 140 meters before stopping. 4 people had walked in 4 directions and had all simply ceased to leave footprints at different points in the empty scrubland. The search operation that followed was one of the largest in Northern Territory history. More than 200 personnel were deployed, including police, emergency services, military, and volunteers. Aircraft flew grid patterns over an area of more than 1,000 square miles. Ground teams walked systematic lines through the scrubland, checking every bush, every depression, every possible location where a person might be. Aboriginal trackers from the local Anmajere community were brought in. These men had grown up tracking in this country. They could follow trails that were invisible to European eyes. They examined the footprints carefully. The lead tracker, a man named Tommy Williams, told investigators that he had never seen anything like it. The prints were clear and recent. They showed 4 people walking with purpose, not wandering or confused. Then they stopped, not gradually, not at a watercourse where prints might wash away. They stopped in the middle of nothing. Tommy said the ground was undisturbed. If someone had picked the family up, there would be signs. If a vehicle had driven out to get them, there would be tracks. If they had been carried, there would be drag marks or compressed vegetation. There was nothing. The search continued for 17 days. No trace of the Morrison family was found beyond the footprints. No clothing, no bodies, no indication of where 4 people had gone after their trails ended. Investigators considered every possibility. Had the family staged their own disappearance? Analysis of their finances showed no unusual withdrawals. No secret accounts, no indication of planning. Their passports were found in the vehicle. Their relationships with extended family and friends appeared healthy. There was no apparent reason for them to vanish voluntarily. Had they been abducted? No witnesses reported any other vehicles in the area. The road train driver who found the Land Cruiser had passed the same stretch of highway the previous day and had not seen the vehicle. The family had stopped sometime between their departure from Alice Springs and when the vehicle was discovered, a window of approximately 28 hours. But an abduction did not explain the footprints. Why would abductors allow the family to walk in 4 different directions before taking them? Why were there no signs of vehicles or additional people? Why did the prints end so cleanly? The coroner's inquest, held in 2022, could not determine what had happened to the Morrison family. The finding was open, indicating that the evidence was insufficient to determine cause of death or even confirm that deaths had occurred. The family was declared missing, presumed dead. Rebecca's sister, Claire, has become an advocate for continued investigation. She has hired private investigators, consulted with tracking experts, and visited the site multiple times. She has found no answers. She has stood at the point where the footprints end and looked out at the empty landscape. There is nothing there. No features, no hiding places, no explanation for how 4 people could walk to that spot and then cease to exist. The satellite phone troubles her the most. If anything had gone wrong with the vehicle, Paul would have used it. If anyone was injured or ill, Rebecca would have called for help. If the family was in danger from any external threat, they would have tried to summon assistance. The phone was fully charged, fully functional, and had not been used. They stopped the car. They got out. They walked in 4 different directions. And they vanished. The Morrison family has been missing for 5 years. No trace of any of the 4 has ever been found. The Land Cruiser has been returned to the rental company, cleaned, and returned to service. The stretch of highway where they stopped looks like any other. Thousands of vehicles pass it every year, their occupants unaware of what happened there. Why did the Morrison family stop on that remote stretch of highway? Why did they leave everything behind, including their emergency satellite phone? Why did they walk in 4 different directions? How did their footprints simply end in the middle of open ground? Where are Paul, Rebecca, Sophie, and James Morrison? We do not know. The patterns continue to emerge. Equipment and belongings left behind. Trails that end impossibly. Evidence that makes no sense. The next case takes us to Japan, where a solo traveler's GPS device recorded movements that should have been physically impossible. Aokigahara Forest lies at the base of Mount Fuji, Japan's most iconic landmark. The forest covers approximately 14 square miles of volcanic rock and dense vegetation. The trees grow so thickly that the canopy blocks most sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight on the forest floor. The volcanic rock absorbs sound, making the forest unnaturally quiet. Compasses are unreliable due to magnetic anomalies in the iron-rich volcanic soil. The forest has a dark reputation. In Japanese mythology, it is associated with demons and ghosts. In modern times, it has become known internationally for a tragic reason. The forest is one of the most common sites for suicide in Japan. Despite efforts by authorities to discourage this, including signs posted throughout the forest urging visitors to reconsider and providing helpline numbers, people continue to enter Aokigahara and not return. But the forest also attracts tourists for legitimate reasons. The ice cave and wind cave, formed by volcanic activity, are popular attractions. Hiking trails wind through the forest, offering glimpses of the unique ecosystem. Photographers come to capture the otherworldly atmosphere. Scientists study the volcanic geology and unusual plant life. Park authorities maintain designated trails and warn visitors not to stray from the marked paths. The forest is dense and disorienting. Without GPS or careful navigation, becoming lost is easy. People have wandered for hours, unable to find their way back to the trailheads, even when they were only a few hundred meters from the marked routes. Lars Eriksson was 38 years old in October of 2021. He was a software engineer from Stockholm, Sweden, traveling alone through Japan on a 3-week holiday. He had visited Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka before making his way to the Mount Fuji region. He was an experienced hiker who had walked trails throughout Scandinavia and the Alps. He understood the importance of proper equipment and preparation. On October 19th, Lars took a bus from Kawaguchiko to the Aokigahara ice cave parking area. He planned to explore the cave, then hike one of the marked trails through the forest before returning to his hotel by evening. He carried a day pack with water, snacks, a rain jacket, and his phone. He also carried a dedicated GPS device, a Garmin model popular with hikers, which he had used throughout his Japan trip to record his routes. Lars entered the ice cave at approximately 10:30 in the morning. The cave visit took about 45 minutes. He emerged and began walking the nature trail that loops through the forest near the cave entrance. Park records show he passed a ranger checkpoint at 11:20, where he asked about trail conditions and mentioned he planned to walk the full loop, a distance of approximately 3 miles. He was seen by other tourists at several points along the trail during the next hour. A French couple photographed the scenery at approximately 11:45 and later realized that a figure visible in the background of one image was Lars, identifiable by his distinctive red backpack. At approximately 12:30, Lars reached a junction where the loop trail reconnected with the path back to the parking area. He was 1 mile from his starting point. He was never seen again. When Lars did not return to his hotel that evening, the staff became concerned. He had told them he would be back by dinner. By 9 o'clock, when he still had not appeared and was not answering his phone, they contacted police. Search teams entered the forest at first light on October 20th. They walked the entire loop trail without finding any sign of Lars. They expanded the search to adjacent trails and the areas between marked paths. The forest was dense, but teams moved methodically, checking every possible location. On October 21st, a searcher found Lars's backpack. It was sitting at the base of a large tree, approximately 400 meters off the marked trail, in dense forest that would have been difficult to navigate. The backpack was upright, leaning against the tree trunk, positioned as if carefully placed. Inside were Lars's water bottle, half full, his snacks mostly uneaten, his rain jacket, his phone with a dead battery, and his GPS device. Lars himself was not there. Investigators charged the GPS device and downloaded the track log, hoping to understand Lars's movements on the day he disappeared. What they found defied explanation. The GPS showed Lars's route from the parking area to the ice cave, through the cave, and onto the nature trail. The data matched the timeline established by witness sightings. At 12:28, the GPS showed Lars at the trail junction, exactly where he would have been based on the French couple's photograph timeline. Then the track became impossible. At 12:31, 3 minutes after the trail junction, the GPS recorded Lars's position as being 2.3 kilometers north of the junction. This would require traveling at a speed of approximately 46 kilometers per hour through dense forest. At 12:35, 4 minutes later, the GPS showed him 3.1 kilometers east of the previous position. This would require traveling at approximately 47 kilometers per hour. At 12:42, the GPS recorded a position 4.7 kilometers south, then back at a point near the original trail at 12:48, then deep in the forest again at 12:51. Over a period of approximately 40 minutes, the GPS recorded Lars moving across an area of more than 12 square kilometers at speeds that would be impossible on foot through any terrain, let alone the dense, obstacle-filled floor of Aokigahara forest. The track log showed more than 60 position changes during this period. Some were gradual, suggesting normal walking speed. Others were instantaneous jumps of hundreds or thousands of meters. The pattern made no logical sense. Investigators initially suspected the GPS had malfunctioned. The magnetic anomalies in the volcanic rock were known to affect compasses. Perhaps they also affected GPS reception. But technical analysis of the device found no malfunction. The satellite connections recorded during the track were strong and consistent. The position calculations were within normal accuracy parameters. The data appeared to show Lars's actual movements, but those movements were impossible. The final position recorded on the GPS was at 13:14, approximately 45 minutes after the impossible track began. The location was the base of the tree where the backpack would later be found. After that timestamp, the track log stopped. Either the device was turned off, or it stopped receiving signals. The search continued for 12 days. More than 300 personnel participated, including police, fire services, military, and volunteers. Every meter of forest within 5 kilometers of the backpack location was searched. Dogs were brought in, but were confused by the magnetic soil and struggled to track effectively. Lars Eriksson was never found. His family in Sweden has the GPS device. They have examined the track log countless times, trying to find an explanation. They have consulted with GPS engineers, hiking experts, and physicists. No one can explain how the device recorded the movements it shows. Some suggest Lars may have given the device to someone else, perhaps another hiker who carried it while Lars went a different direction. But there is no evidence of another person. The backpack contained all of Lars's belongings, except the clothes he was wearing. Why would he give away his GPS but keep his backpack? Others suggest the track log may have been corrupted by the unusual magnetic conditions in the forest. But the data is internally consistent. The timestamps are sequential. The satellite connection data is normal. If the positions were random errors, they would show random patterns. These positions show a route, albeit an impossible one. The final position was exactly where the backpack was found. If the GPS was recording errors, why did it correctly record the final location? Lars's mother, Ingrid, has visited Aokigahara twice since her son's disappearance. She has walked the trail he walked. She has stood at the tree where his backpack was found. The forest is quiet, the trees pressing close, the light dim even at midday. She does not understand what happened to her son. She does not understand how his GPS recorded movements through 12 square kilometers of forest in 40 minutes. She does not understand why he left his backpack against a tree and walked away into the forest, never to be seen again. She knows only that Lars entered Aokigahara on a marked trail in broad daylight and vanished. She knows that his GPS recorded something impossible. She knows that despite one of the most extensive searches in the region's history, her son has never been found. Lars Eriksson has been missing for 4 years. His body has never been recovered. The Japanese authorities have classified the case as an unexplained disappearance. What happened to Lars in Aokigahara forest? How did his GPS record movements covering 12 square kilometers in 40 minutes? Why did he leave his backpack at the base of a tree and disappear? Where is Lars now? We do not know. We have now examined 6 cases. A photographer in Greece whose camera recorded impossible timestamps. A tourist in Peru whose belongings appeared on an inaccessible cliff. A photographer in Iceland whose camera traveled 15 miles to an impossible location. A diver in Mexico whose wetsuit was found in a cave system that does not connect to where he disappeared. A family in Australia whose footprints led in 4 directions and simply stopped. A hiker in Japan whose GPS recorded physically impossible movements. The patterns are undeniable. Equipment and belongings found in locations that cannot be explained. Trails and tracks that end impossibly. Technology recording data that defies physics. And in every case, a person or people who vanished without explanation. Our final case in this part takes us to Norway, where a kayaker disappeared in a fjord and left behind evidence that still puzzles investigators. The Norwegian fjords are among the most dramatic landscapes on Earth. These long, narrow inlets were carved by glaciers over millions of years, creating sheer cliff walls that rise thousands of feet from the water. The fjords extend dozens of miles inland from the coast, their still waters reflecting the mountains above. They are havens for wildlife, including seals, porpoises, and countless seabirds. Kayaking the fjords has become increasingly popular with tourists seeking an intimate experience of the Norwegian landscape. The calm waters are generally suitable for paddlers of various skill levels, though conditions can change rapidly. Winds can funnel through the narrow passages, creating challenging waves. Weather can shift from sunshine to rain within minutes. The water temperature, even in summer, is cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes of immersion. The Geiranger Fjord in western Norway is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, considered one of the most beautiful fjords in the country. The fjord stretches approximately 15 kilometers, with walls rising more than 1,000 meters on either side. Waterfalls cascade down the cliffs. Abandoned farms cling to impossibly steep slopes. Cruise ships navigate the narrow passage, dwarfed by the scale of the landscape. Kayak tours operate throughout the summer season, offering guided excursions for visitors who want to experience the fjord at water level. Solo kayaking is also permitted for experienced paddlers who register with local authorities and demonstrate appropriate equipment and skills. Maria Bergström was 29 years old in July of 2023. She was a marketing consultant from Copenhagen, Denmark, with extensive kayaking experience gained on the lakes and coastal waters near her home. She had kayaked in Sweden, Finland, and Scotland before planning her Norwegian adventure. She was fit, confident, and thoroughly prepared. On July 8th, Maria registered with the Geiranger Port Authority for a solo kayak excursion. She had rented equipment from a local outfitter, including a sea kayak, paddle, dry suit, personal flotation device, and emergency signaling equipment. She filed a float plan indicating she intended to paddle approximately 8 kilometers into the fjord, explore a side inlet, and return by evening. Total expected time on the water was 6 to 7 hours. Maria launched at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning. The conditions were excellent: calm water, light winds, partly cloudy skies. The outfitter, a man named Erik Haugen, watched her paddle away from the dock. He later told investigators that her technique was good, her pace was steady, and she appeared completely comfortable on the water. At approximately 11:30 in the morning, Maria was seen by passengers on a tour boat traveling through the fjord. Several people photographed the scenery, and in reviewing images later, investigators found Maria visible in 3 photographs, paddling near the entrance to a side inlet called Frieren. She appeared to be heading into the inlet, which was part of her filed float plan. She was never seen again. When Maria did not return by 8 o'clock in the evening, Erik Haugen contacted the Coast Guard. A search was initiated immediately, with boats dispatched to her planned route. At approximately 10:30 that night, searchers found Maria's kayak. It was floating in the side inlet where she had been photographed entering, approximately 2 kilometers from the inlet's entrance. The kayak was upside down, overturned, drifting slowly with the minimal current. The searchers righted the kayak and examined it. What they found made no sense. The inside of the kayak was completely dry. A kayak that has overturned in water, even briefly, will have water inside. The cockpit will flood. The interior surfaces will be wet. Even if a kayak is righted quickly, there will be evidence of water contact. Maria's kayak showed no such evidence. The seat was dry. The foot pegs were dry. The storage compartments, when opened, were dry. The kayak appeared to have been placed in the water upside down, without ever having been occupied while in contact with water. Maria's paddle was found floating nearby. It was also dry, except for the blades that had been submerged. Her dry suit was inside the kayak's rear storage compartment. It was neatly folded, as if carefully packed rather than hastily removed. It was dry. Her personal flotation device was also in the storage compartment, also folded, also dry. Maria had apparently removed her dry suit and PFD, folded them, packed them in the kayak's storage, then somehow caused the kayak to end up overturned in the water while remaining completely dry inside. This should not be possible. The search expanded to cover the entire inlet and the surrounding fjord. Divers examined the water beneath where the kayak was found. The fjord is deep here, more than 200 meters, but divers checked the shallower areas near the shores. Helicopters flew patterns over the water and the surrounding cliffs. Teams walked the shoreline and climbed to the abandoned farms that dot the steep slopes. On the 3rd day of the search, a discovery was made that deepened the mystery. Maria's emergency signaling equipment, a personal locator beacon and a marine radio, was found on a narrow ledge approximately 350 meters above the water level. The ledge was accessible only by technical climbing. There was no path, no trail, no way for a casual hiker to reach it. Maria had no climbing experience. She had brought no climbing equipment. The cliff face between the water and the ledge was near vertical, rated as a difficult climb, even for experienced mountaineers with proper gear. Yet her equipment was there, positioned on the rock as if carefully placed. The beacon had not been activated. The radio had not been used. Climbing specialists examined the cliff face for any sign of how the equipment, or Maria, might have reached the ledge. They found nothing. No rope marks, no chalk marks, no disturbance in the vegetation that clings to cracks in the rock. Nothing to indicate that anyone had climbed to that ledge. The investigation could not explain the evidence. A kayak overturned but dry inside. Equipment packed away rather than being used. A paddle floating nearby, dry except for the submerged portions. Emergency gear found 350 meters up a cliff that would require technical climbing to reach. If Maria had capsized, her dry suit and PFD would have been on her body. The inside of the kayak would be wet. Her emergency beacon would have been accessible, not packed away. If she had landed on shore and climbed the cliff, there would be evidence of her ascent. There would be no reason to fold and pack her gear rather than wearing it. If someone else had placed the equipment on the ledge, who? And how did they climb the cliff without leaving any sign of their passage? Maria Bergström has been missing for 2 years. Her body has never been recovered. The Norwegian authorities have classified the case as an unexplained disappearance, possibly drowning, though the evidence does not support a typical drowning scenario. Her parents in Copenhagen have the folded dry suit and PFD. They do not understand why their daughter would remove her safety gear, fold it neatly, pack it away, and then somehow end up with her kayak overturned in the water. They do not understand how her emergency equipment reached a cliff ledge 350 meters above the fjord. They have visited Geiranger Fjord twice. They have stood at the water's edge, looking up at the cliff where Maria's beacon was found. The ledge is barely visible, a tiny shelf on the vast rock face. Getting there would require ropes, harnesses, protection gear, and significant climbing ability. Maria had none of these things, yet her equipment was there. What happened to Maria Bergström in the Geiranger Fjord? Why was her kayak overturned but completely dry inside? Why were her dry suit and PFD folded and packed away? How did her emergency equipment reach a ledge 350 meters up a cliff she could not have climbed? Where is Maria now? We do not know. We have now examined 7 cases from around the world. 7 tourists who vanished under circumstances that defy explanation. 7 sets of evidence that do not fit any conventional theory. 7 families still waiting for answers that may never come. The patterns are impossible to ignore. Equipment found in impossible locations. Timelines that violate physics. Trails that end in the middle of nothing. Technology recording data that cannot be explained. In Part 3, we will examine the final 3 cases and attempt to understand what these patterns might mean. One involves a honeymoon couple in New Zealand, whose tent was found, but whose footprints suggested they had walked in opposite directions before vanishing. Another involves a solo traveler in Scotland, whose drone recorded footage of him walking toward something that was not there. The third involves a group of friends in Brazil, whose last photographs show a figure in the jungle that none of them reported seeing. After these cases, we will examine the theories that have been proposed. We will consider what connects these disappearances across continents and decades. We will ask questions that may not have answers. Subscribe now if you have not already. Turn on notifications so you do not miss Part 3. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. How did Marcus Chen's wetsuit travel through solid rock? How did the Morrison family's footprints simply end? What did Lars Eriksson's GPS actually record? We read every comment. Some of you have traveled to these places. Some of you have experienced things you cannot explain. Share your stories. This is the final part of our investigation into tourists who vanished, leaving behind evidence that no one could explain. If you have not seen parts 1 and 2, stop now and go back. Everything we are about to discuss builds on what came before. You need to understand the patterns before we reach our conclusions. In Part 1, we examined 3 cases. Thomas Ashworth, whose camera recorded photographs from locations across a Greek island in time frames that were physically impossible. Nathan Caldwell, who vanished at Machu Picchu in 2 minutes and left his backpack on a cliff 300 meters above where he was last seen. Emma Lindqvist, who walked into the Icelandic Sea, leaving footprints that showed no hesitation, and a camera that would later be found 15 miles away, with one final unexplainable image. In Part 2, we covered 4 more cases. Marcus Chen, a diver who removed his equipment inside an underwater cave on camera, swam toward a light that should not exist, and whose wetsuit was later found in a different cave system with no physical connection. The Morrison family, whose footprints led in 4 different directions from their running vehicle before simply stopping in the Australian outback. Lars Eriksson, whose GPS recorded movements covering 12 square kilometers in 40 minutes through dense Japanese forest. Maria Bergstrom, whose kayak was found overturned but completely dry inside, with her emergency equipment discovered 350 meters up a cliff she could not have climbed. 7 cases, 7 continents, 7 sets of evidence that contradict everything we think we understand about what can happen to people when they travel. The cases we will examine in this final part complete the pattern. One involves a honeymoon couple in New Zealand whose tent remained standing, but whose footprints led in opposite directions before vanishing. Another involves a solo traveler in Scotland whose drone captured footage of him walking toward something invisible. The third involves a group of friends in Brazil whose photographs show a figure that none of them reported seeing. After we cover these cases, we will step back and examine what all this evidence might mean. We will look at the patterns that connect these disappearances. We will consider the theories that have been proposed. We will ask questions that deserve to be asked, even if they cannot be answered. Let us continue. New Zealand's South Island contains some of the most spectacular wilderness on Earth. The Southern Alps run the length of the island, their snow-capped peaks rising to more than 3,700 meters. Glaciers flow down from the mountains into valleys carpeted with ancient rainforest. Fjords cut deep into the western coast, their waters dark and still beneath towering cliffs. The landscape is so dramatic that it has served as the backdrop for countless films depicting fantasy worlds. The Fiordland National Park, in the southwestern corner of the island, is the largest national park in New Zealand and one of the largest in the world. It covers more than 12,000 square kilometers of mountains, forests, lakes, and fjords. Much of the park is accessible only by boat, helicopter, or multi-day hiking expeditions. Some areas have never been fully explored. The terrain is challenging, the weather is unpredictable, and the isolation is profound. Milford Sound, the most famous of the fjords, attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors annually. Cruise boats navigate its waters, passengers photographing the sheer cliffs and waterfalls. But beyond the tourist areas, Fiordland remains wild. Trampers, as New Zealanders call hikers, walk the famous multi-day tracks, including the Milford Track, the Routeburn Track, and the Kepler Track. These are well-maintained trails with huts for overnight accommodation, designed to provide a wilderness experience within a framework of safety. But many visitors venture beyond the established tracks, seeking solitude in one of the last truly wild places in the developed world. They carry tents and supplies for days of independence. They navigate by map and compass through terrain that can change from benign to dangerous within hours. Most return with stories of adventure and photographs of extraordinary beauty. Some do not return at all. James and Catherine Porter were both 28 years old in January of 2022. They had been married for exactly 2 weeks. Their wedding in Auckland had been followed by a honeymoon journey through the South Island, with Fiordland as the centerpiece of their adventure. Both were experienced outdoors people. James worked as an environmental scientist, spending much of his professional life conducting field research in remote areas. Catherine was a veterinarian who had grown up on a farm and was comfortable in wilderness settings. They had planned their Fiordland expedition carefully. 4 days of backcountry camping, starting from a remote trailhead near Lake Manapuri and penetrating into an area with no established tracks or facilities. They carried a tent, sleeping bags, food for 5 days, water purification equipment, emergency beacon, satellite phone, and detailed topographic maps. They filed their intended route with the Department of Conservation and arranged for a water taxi to pick them up at a predetermined location on day 5. On January 14th, The water taxi dropped them at a remote bay on Lake Manapuri. The skipper, a man named Graham MacDonald, who had been operating in Fjordland for more than 30 years, watched them shoulder their packs and disappear into the forest. He later told investigators they seemed well prepared, excited, and completely confident. The first 2 days of their journey proceeded as planned. Catherine's satellite phone records show brief check-in messages to her mother on the evenings of January 14th and 15th. Both messages indicated the couple was on schedule and enjoying spectacular scenery. The second message mentioned they had found a perfect campsite by a small alpine lake and planned to spend an extra night there. On January 16th, there was no check-in message. On January 17th, there was no message. On January 18th, when the water taxi arrived at the pickup location, James and Catherine were not there. Graham MacDonald waited for 2 hours, then contacted the Department of Conservation. A search was initiated immediately. The terrain made rapid response difficult. Helicopters could not fly due to low clouds and rain. Ground teams had to hike in from multiple directions, a process that took more than a day. On January 19th, searchers found the couple's tent. It was pitched beside the small alpine lake mentioned in Catherine's final message, exactly where they had planned to camp. The tent was properly erected, guy lines taut, rain fly in place. From a distance, it appeared the couple might still be inside, waiting out the weather. They were not. Inside the tent, searchers found both sleeping bags, unrolled and apparently used, 2 sleeping pads, 2 pillows with indentations suggesting heads had rested on them. Catherine's book, a novel she had been reading, was open face down beside her sleeping bag, as if she had set it aside temporarily. James's hiking boots were inside the tent, positioned neatly at the foot of his sleeping bag. Catherine's boots were also inside, in the same position. Their packs were inside the tent, fully stocked with remaining food and equipment. The emergency beacon was in James's pack, never activated. The satellite phone was in Catherine's pack, battery dead. All of their clothing, except what they had presumably been wearing, was present. Their rain gear, their warm layers, their hats and gloves, all remained. The only items missing were James and Catherine themselves, and whatever clothes they had been wearing when they left the tent. The discovery raised immediate questions. Why would the couple leave their tent in the middle of the night, based on the unused sleeping bags that showed signs of having been slept in, without putting on their boots? Why would they leave behind their emergency communication equipment? Why would they venture out in darkness into remote wilderness wearing apparently minimal clothing? Then searchers examined the ground around the tent. The lakeshore was muddy, soft from recent rain. Footprints were clearly visible. 2 sets of bare footprints led away from the tent. The prints showed a man and a woman walking without shoes. They exited the tent on opposite sides. James's footprints led north from the tent, toward a rocky ridge that rose steeply from the lakeshore. Catherine's footprints led south, toward a dense stand of native beech forest. They had walked away from each other, in the middle of the night, barefoot, in opposite directions. Searchers followed both sets of prints as far as possible. James's footprints continued north for approximately 160 meters, climbing the initial slope of the ridge. The terrain became rockier as the elevation increased, making prints harder to discern. At a point approximately 210 meters from the tent, on a section of exposed rock, the trail ended. There were no further prints beyond this point, despite patches of mud and soft ground that would have shown evidence of passage. Catherine's footprints continued south into the beech forest for approximately 140 meters. The forest floor was covered with moss and leaf litter, but her prints were visible in the softer sections. At a point where the forest opened into a small clearing, the footprints stopped. The clearing continued for another 30 meters to a stream. There were no prints in the clearing. There were no prints near the stream. The trail simply ended. Both James and Catherine had walked barefoot away from their tent in opposite directions and had both stopped leaving footprints at different points in the wilderness. The search continued for 11 days. More than 180 personnel participated, including Department of Conservation Rangers, police search and rescue, military, and volunteers. Helicopters flew when weather permitted. Dogs were brought in, but struggled with the wet conditions and dense vegetation. Neither James nor Catherine was found. The investigation could not explain the evidence. Why would a honeymoon couple, by all accounts deeply in love and happy, walk away from each other into the wilderness in the middle of the night? Why barefoot? Why without communication equipment? Why in opposite directions? Some investigators suggested the couple might have had a dispute, a fight that caused them to storm away from each other. But this did not explain the bare feet. It did not explain leaving behind all emergency equipment. And it did not explain why both trails ended so completely, without any further trace. Others suggested they might have heard something, an animal perhaps, that caused them to investigate in different directions. But what animal would prompt two people to leave their boots behind and walk in opposite directions? And why would both of them vanish completely? The possibility of foul play was considered, but there was no evidence of any other person, no additional footprints, no sign of struggle, no indication that anyone else had been at the campsite. Catherine's mother has visited the lake where her daughter vanished. She has seen the tent site, the footprints preserved in photographs, the wilderness that swallowed two young people on their honeymoon. She does not understand how her daughter could walk barefoot into the forest in the middle of the night and simply vanish. She does not understand why Catherine and James walked in opposite directions. She does not understand why they left behind everything that could have saved them. She knows only that her daughter was deeply in love, excitedly married, eagerly exploring one of the most beautiful places on Earth. And then she walked into the darkness and never came back. James and Catherine Porter have been missing for 3 years. Their bodies have never been recovered. The New Zealand authorities have classified the case as an unexplained disappearance. The tent they left behind has been removed. The lakeshore has been disturbed by subsequent seasons of rain and snow, but the photographs of those footprints remain. Two people walking away from each other. Two trails that end in the middle of nothing. What happened at that alpine lake on the night of January 15th or 16th, 2022? Why did James and Catherine walk away from each other barefoot? What were they walking toward? Why did their footprints simply stop? Where are they now? We do not know. If these cases are keeping you awake at night, you understand why we are investigating them. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. We have 2 more cases to cover, and then we will attempt to make sense of everything we have learned. The next case takes us to the Scottish Highlands, where a solo traveler brought a drone to capture aerial footage of the landscape. The footage it recorded would become evidence in an investigation that remains unsolved. The Scottish Highlands cover the northern and northwestern portions of Scotland, a landscape of rugged mountains, deep lochs, and vast moorlands. The terrain was shaped by glaciers during the last ice age, leaving behind dramatic valleys, steep peaks, and thousands of freshwater lakes. The region is sparsely populated, with tiny villages scattered across huge expanses of wild land. Sheep outnumber people by a considerable margin. The highlands attract visitors seeking wilderness experiences that are increasingly rare in densely populated Europe. Hikers walk the long-distance paths, including the West Highland Way and the Cape Wrath Trail. Climbers tackle the Munros, the 282 peaks over 3,000 feet. Photographers capture the ever-changing light that gives the landscape its mystical quality. The weather is notoriously unpredictable. Clear mornings can turn to dense fog within minutes. Rain is frequent. Wind is constant. The terrain, while generally not technically difficult, can become dangerous when visibility drops or when travelers underestimate distances. The highlands claim lives every year, most often due to exposure or falls in poor conditions. The area around Glencoe, in the Western Highlands, is among the most dramatic in Scotland. The valley is surrounded by steep mountains, their ridges often shrouded in clouds. The scenery is simultaneously beautiful and foreboding. The valley has a dark history, including a massacre of the MacDonald clan in 1692 that left the area with a haunted reputation. Modern visitors come for the hiking, the climbing, and the photography. The area is popular with content creators who use drones to capture aerial perspectives of the landscape. The combination of dramatic terrain, atmospheric conditions, and relative accessibility makes Glencoe a prime destination for visual storytelling. Robert Jansen was 33 years old in September of 2023. He was a travel content creator from the Netherlands with a substantial following on social media platforms. He specialized in solo adventure travel, documenting his journeys through remote and beautiful places. His videos featured drone footage, first-person perspectives, and thoughtful narration about the experience of traveling alone. Robert had been planning a Scotland trip for months. He intended to spend 2 weeks exploring the Highlands, creating content for multiple videos. Glencoe was to be the centerpiece of his journey, with plans for several days of hiking and drone filming in the area. On September 11th, Robert drove to a remote car park in Glen Etive, a side valley that connects to Glencoe. The area is famous for a road that winds along a river, passing through scenery that has appeared in numerous films. Robert planned to hike into the hills above the valley and capture drone footage of the landscape at sunset. He left a note on his dashboard indicating his intended route and expected return time, a common safety practice for solo hikers in Scotland. He expected to be back at the vehicle by approximately 8 o'clock in the evening. He never returned. When Robert did not appear at his accommodation that night and did not answer messages the following morning, the property owner contacted police. Officers found his rental car at the Glen Etive car park, the note still on the dashboard. His expected return time had passed by more than 12 hours. Mountain rescue teams were deployed immediately. The terrain Robert had planned to cover was searched systematically. Helicopters flew when the weather permitted. Ground teams walked every path, every ridge, every location where a hiker might have traveled. On the afternoon of September 13th, a rescue team member found Robert's backpack. It was sitting on a flat rock beside a small stream, approximately 3 kilometers from the car park and roughly along Robert's intended route. The pack was upright, positioned as if carefully placed. Inside were Robert's water bottle, food, rain jacket, extra clothing layers, and his camera. His drone and its controller were also in the pack. The drone was undamaged and fully charged. Robert himself was not there. Searchers expanded the area covered, checking every possible location within a wide radius of where the pack was found. The terrain was challenging, with steep slopes, rocky outcrops, and areas of bog that could be dangerous in poor visibility. But the weather during the search was good. Conditions were clear. If Robert was in the area, he should have been findable. He was not found. Investigators examined the contents of Robert's pack in detail. The camera contained photographs from the day of his disappearance, showing the Glen Etive Road, the river, the initial stages of his hike. The final photograph was time-stamped at 5:42 in the evening, showing a view across the valley that matched a location approximately 500 meters from where the pack was found. The drone's memory card contained more extensive footage. Robert had flown the drone multiple times during the afternoon, capturing sweeping aerial views of the valley and surrounding peaks. The footage was stunning, the kind of content that had built his following. The final flight was time-stamped beginning at 6:14 in the evening. The footage from this final flight would become the central evidence in the investigation. The drone launched from a location matching where the backpack was found, climbing to an altitude of approximately 120 meters. It flew in a wide circle, capturing the valley below, the peaks catching the evening light, the shadows lengthening across the moorland. At 6:18, approximately 4 minutes into the flight, the drone's camera captured Robert himself. He was visible on the ground below, standing beside the stream where his pack would later be found. He appeared to be looking at something to the north, away from the drone. At 6:19, Robert began walking. The drone continued circling, its camera periodically capturing him as he moved north across the moorland. His pace was steady. He did not appear to be running or distressed. He was simply walking with purpose towards something in the distance. At 6:22, the drone footage showed Robert stopping. He was now approximately 200 meters from the stream. He appeared to be looking at something directly ahead of him. The drone's camera showed the landscape where Robert was looking. Empty moorland, heather and grass and patches of bare rock. Nothing visible that would attract attention. But Robert stood there, motionless, for more than a minute. The drone continued circling, capturing him from multiple angles. In every frame, He was staring at the same empty patch of moorland approximately 50 meters ahead of him. At 6:23, Robert began walking again, toward the empty space he had been watching. The drone continued recording. Robert walked steadily across the heather. The camera captured him from behind, from the side, from multiple perspectives as the drone circled. At 6:25, Robert reached the location he had been walking toward, and then the footage became impossible to explain. Robert stopped walking. He appeared to raise his hand, as if reaching toward something. The drone footage showed clearly that there was nothing in front of him. Empty air, the moorland extending beyond. Then Robert took one more step forward, and he was gone. One frame showed Robert, hand raised, stepping forward. The next frame, recorded 1/30th of a second later, showed the empty moorland. No Robert, no indication of where he had gone, no movement, no fall, no transition. He was there, and then he was not. The drone continued recording for another 11 minutes before returning automatically to its launch point, where it landed beside Robert's pack. The controller showed it had been set to automatic return mode, suggesting Robert had intended to retrieve it after completing whatever he was doing. He never retrieved it. Investigators analyzed the footage extensively. Frame-by-frame examination confirmed what the initial viewing suggested. Robert Jansen walked across an empty moorland, stopped, raised his hand, stepped forward, and vanished between frames. Some suggested the footage might be corrupted or manipulated, but technical analysis found no evidence of tampering. The video file was continuous, with no splices or edits. The metadata was consistent with authentic drone footage. The timestamps matched the camera's internal clock. Others suggested Robert might have fallen into a hidden hole or crevice. The location was searched exhaustively. There were no holes. The ground was solid moorland, without any feature that could explain a sudden disappearance. The moorland where Robert vanished was excavated to a depth of more than 2 meters in places. Nothing was found. No body. No indication that the ground had been disturbed before searchers arrived. Robert Jansen has been missing for 2 years. His body has never been recovered. The Scottish authorities have classified the case as an unexplained disappearance. The drone footage has been viewed millions of times. It was released by Robert's family in hopes that someone might be able to explain what it shows. No one has been able to explain it. His parents in Amsterdam have watched the footage countless times. They have seen their son walk across a Scottish moorland toward nothing, raise his hand as if greeting someone, take a step forward, and cease to exist. They do not understand what Robert was walking toward. They do not understand why he raised his hand. They do not understand how a person can be captured on video one frame and be gone the next. They know only that their son was alone on a hillside in Scotland, that his drone recorded his final moments, and that what it recorded should not be possible. What did Robert Jansen see on that moorland? Why did he walk toward it? Why did he raise his hand? How did he disappear between frames of video? Where is Robert now? We do not know. We have one final case to examine. Then we will step back and consider what all of this evidence means. The last case takes us to Brazil, to a remote section of the Amazon, where a group of friends documented their journey with photographs that would later reveal something none of them reported seeing. The Amazon rainforest is the largest tropical rainforest on Earth, covering approximately 5.5 million square kilometers across 9 countries. The majority lies within Brazil, where the forest extends for thousands of kilometers in every direction, a seemingly endless expanse of green broken only by rivers that wind through the canopy, like brown ribbons. The biodiversity of the Amazon is staggering. Scientists estimate the forest contains more than 10% of all species on Earth, including millions that have not yet been documented. New species of insects, plants, and even larger animals are discovered regularly. The forest holds secrets that humanity has barely begun to understand. For most of human history, the Amazon was home only to indigenous peoples who had learned to survive in its challenging environment. European colonizers attempted to explore and exploit the forest, often with disastrous results. The jungle resisted penetration. Expeditions disappeared. Those who returned told stories of disease, hostile wildlife, and an environment that seemed determined to kill intruders. Modern ecotourism has made portions of the Amazon accessible to visitors. Lodges along major rivers offer guided excursions into the forest. Tourists can experience the rainforest while remaining within reach of safety and support. But beyond these managed experiences, the Amazon remains largely impenetrable. Indigenous territories, protected reserves, and simply unreachable wilderness cover most of the forest. Some adventurous travelers seek experiences beyond the tourist lodges. They hire local guides, travel by boat deep into the forest, and camp in areas where few outsiders have ever been. These journeys carry real risks. Communication is limited. Medical care is distant. The forest contains hazards ranging from venomous animals to waterborne diseases, to the ever-present possibility of becoming lost in terrain that all looks the same. In August of 2020, a group of 5 friends from Argentina planned an expedition into a remote section of the Brazilian Amazon. They were all in their late 20s, all experienced travelers, all seeking an adventure beyond the ordinary tourist experience. They had hired a local guide, a Brazilian man named Eduardo Santos, who had grown up in a riverside community and knew the forest intimately. The group consisted of Martin Vega, 28, a physician from Buenos Aires; Sofia Reyes, 27, an architect; Lucas Fernandez, 29, a software developer; Isabella Moreno, 26, a journalist; and Andres Gutierrez, 28, a photographer who planned to document the journey for a travel publication. They departed from Manaus on August 15th, traveling by boat up the Rio Negro for 3 days before turning into a smaller tributary, and then an even smaller channel. By August 18th, they had reached a point where no boat could continue. They established a base camp on the riverbank and began daily excursions into the surrounding forest on foot. Eduardo led them along game trails and waterways, showing them wildlife, medicinal plants, and the hidden wonders of the forest. The group documented everything. Andres shot hundreds of photographs. Isabella kept detailed notes for an article she planned to write. All 5 used their phones to take additional pictures. The expedition proceeded normally for 4 days. Check-in messages sent via satellite phone indicated the group was healthy, excited, and experiencing everything they had hoped for. On August 22nd, the group set out on what was planned to be their most ambitious day hike. Eduardo would lead them to a waterfall he knew of, approximately 8 kilometers from their base camp. The round trip would take most of the day. They carried food, water, and camera equipment. They left their heavier supplies at base camp. They never returned to base camp. On August 24th, when the satellite phone check-in did not occur and follow-up messages received no response, the tour company in Manaus initiated emergency procedures. A search team was dispatched by boat, reaching the base camp on August 26th. The camp was undisturbed. The group's tents were standing. Their main supplies were intact. But the 5 friends and their guide were not there. The search that followed was complicated by the terrain. The forest was dense, the trails were faint, and the area was vast. Teams worked from the base camp outward, checking every possible route the group might have taken. On August 29th, searchers found Eduardo's machete. It was stuck blade first into a tree trunk approximately 5 kilometers from base camp, along what appeared to be a game trail. The machete was Eduardo's primary tool for clearing vegetation. He would not have left it behind voluntarily. Nearby, searchers found Martin Vega's day pack. Inside were water bottles, snack bars, and a first aid kit. The pack was sitting on the ground, leaning against a tree root. Over the next 2 days, additional items were found scattered along what appeared to be the group's route. Sophia's hat, Lucas's sunglasses, Isabella's notebook, the pages blank beyond her last entry, dated August 21st. Andres's spare camera lens. The items were found over a distance of approximately 3 kilometers, as if dropped or discarded one by one as the group moved through the forest. Each item was found alone, without any sign of the person who had been carrying it. No bodies were found, no blood, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened to 6 people who had walked into the forest and never walked out. The investigation focused heavily on Eduardo. Perhaps the guide had led the group into danger. Perhaps he had been involved in foul play. But those who knew Eduardo rejected this possibility. He had guided dozens of expeditions without incident. He was known throughout the region as reliable and safety-conscious, and his machete, his most important tool, had been left behind, suggesting he had not departed voluntarily. The search continued for 18 days, covering an area of more than 200 square kilometers. No trace of the 6 missing people was found beyond the scattered belongings. Then investigators examined Andres's camera, which had been found in Martin's daypack, along with the spare lens. The camera contained more than 800 photographs from the expedition. Most showed exactly what would be expected: the boat journey, the forest, wildlife, the group members smiling and exploring. The photographs told the story of an adventure proceeding exactly as planned. The final photographs were dated August 22nd, the day the group had set out for the waterfall. The images showed the group hiking through dense forest, Eduardo leading, machete in hand, the 5 friends following in a line, the forest closing in around them, the canopy blocking most of the sky. At 11:43, according to the timestamp, Andres had photographed the group from behind as they walked. All 6 figures were visible, moving along what appeared to be a faint trail through the undergrowth. At 11:47, Andres had photographed the forest ahead. The image showed dense vegetation, trees crowding together, filtered light creating patterns of shadow and illumination. At 11:51, Andres had photographed the group again. The image showed 5 figures from behind, walking through the forest. 5 figures, not 6. Investigators studied the image carefully. Eduardo was visible at the front. Sofia, Lucas, Martin, and Isabella were visible behind him. The spacing suggested nothing unusual, but there were only 5 people in the photograph. Where was Andres? He was taking the photograph. That accounted for his absence from the frame. But in the 11:43 image, all 6 members of the group had been visible, walking ahead of the camera. Andres had been behind them, photographing from the rear. 4 minutes later, someone was missing from the group ahead, and Andres was still behind, still photographing. Unless Andres was not the one taking the photograph, investigators examined the 11:51 image more closely. At the right edge of the frame, partially obscured by vegetation, was a shape. It was dark, roughly human in size, but indistinct. It might have been a tree trunk. It might have been a shadow. It might have been something else. Image analysis could not definitively determine what the shape was, but several analysts noted that it appeared to have bilateral symmetry, like a figure, rather than a natural object. It appeared to be positioned facing the group, as if watching them pass. None of the surviving photographs showed the shape more clearly. None of the group's journal entries or messages mentioned seeing anything unusual in the forest. Whatever the shape was, if it was anything, the group either did not notice it or did not consider it worth documenting. But someone had taken that photograph. If all 6 group members were visible in the 11:43 image, and the camera was recovered in Martin's pack rather than on Andres's person, then either Andres had given his camera to someone else, or someone else had been holding it by 11:51. The 11:51 photograph was the last image on the camera. Whatever happened after that moment was not documented. The investigation could not explain the evidence. The scattered belongings, the impossible photograph showing 5 people when there should have been 6, the indistinct shape at the edge of the frame. The families of the 5 Argentine travelers have formed a support group, sharing information and resources as they continue to seek answers. They have traveled to Brazil multiple times. They have met with investigators, with search teams, with Eduardo's family who lost him in the same event. They have studied the photographs. They have tried to understand how Andres could be visible in one image and not the next, while the camera continued to record. They have tried to identify the shape at the edge of the frame. They have no answers. The 5 friends and their guide have been missing for 5 years. Their bodies have never been recovered. The Brazilian authorities have classified the case as an unexplained disappearance. The Amazon continues. The forest where they vanished remains, green and impenetrable, and full of secrets. Every year, travelers enter seeking adventure. Most return safely. some do not. What happened to the group on August 22nd, 2020? Why were their belongings scattered along 3 kilometers of trail? Who took the photograph that shows 5 people instead of 6? What is the shape at the edge of that final image? Where are Martin, Sophia, Lucas, Isabella, Andres, and Eduardo? We do not know. We have now examined 10 disappearances from around the world. 10 cases where tourists vanished, leaving behind evidence that defies explanation. 10 mysteries that remain unsolved, their patterns challenging our understanding of what is possible. Let us consider what these cases have in common. First, the equipment patterns. In every case, belongings were found in circumstances that do not fit conventional explanations. Cameras in locations their owners could not have reached. Backpacks placed carefully rather than dropped in panic. Kayaks overturned, but dry inside. Emergency beacons never activated despite being present and functional. The missing tourists had the means to call for help. They did not use them. They left their belongings behind in ways that suggest deliberation rather than accident. Second, the trail patterns. In multiple cases, footprints or tracks led away from last known positions and then simply stopped. The Morrison family in Australia, walking in 4 different directions. James and Catherine Porter in New Zealand, walking barefoot in opposite directions. Emma Lindqvist in Iceland, walking directly into the sea without hesitation. Robert Janssen in Scotland, walking toward empty space and vanishing between frames of video. These trails do not end at obstacles or water crossings or rocky terrain where prints might naturally become invisible. They end in the middle of open ground, as if the people making them had stopped existing at those points. Third, the technology anomalies. Multiple cases involved cameras, GPS devices, or drones recording data that should not be possible. Thomas Ashworth's camera photographing locations across an entire island in impossible time frames. Lars Eriksson's GPS recording movements covering 12 square kilometers in 40 minutes. Marcus Chen's underwater camera capturing him swimming toward a light that does not exist. Robert Janssen's drone recording him disappearing between frames. Technology does not lie, but the data these devices recorded does not fit any known explanation. Fourth, the visibility patterns. Several cases involved tourists vanishing, while others were present or watching. Nathan Caldwell disappeared at Machu Picchu in 2 minutes, within easy distance of his group. Olivia Hart vanished at Great Smoky Mountains, while her friends looked away for 30 seconds. Robert Janssen was recorded by his own drone as he walked toward something invisible and ceased to exist. These are not people who wandered off into wilderness alone. These are people who vanished in populated areas, sometimes with witnesses, sometimes on camera. Fifth, the impossible locations. Belongings were repeatedly found in places their owners could not have reached. Nathan Caldwell's backpack on a cliff requiring technical climbing. Maria Bergstrom's emergency beacon 350 meters up an unclimbable rock face. Marcus Chen's wetsuit in a cave system with no physical connection to where he disappeared. Thomas Ashworth's camera in locations that would require impossible speed to reach. If the missing tourists placed these items themselves, they possessed abilities that normal humans do not have. What are we to make of all this? The conventional explanations do not work. These were not inexperienced travelers who made simple mistakes. These were people who knew what they were doing, carrying proper equipment, following reasonable plans. They did not fall into obvious hazards. They did not succumb to predictable dangers. Accidents happen, but accidents leave evidence. Bodies are found. Equipment shows signs of trauma. The circumstances can be reconstructed. In these cases, the evidence does not point toward any coherent accident scenario. The pieces do not fit together. Foul play is always possible, but it does not match the patterns. No signs of other people at the scenes. No motives identified. No connections between victims in different countries and continents. No witnesses to abductions or attacks. And the strange phenomena, the impossible photographs, the vanishing footprints, the items in unreachable locations, do not fit any pattern of criminal behavior. Suicide or voluntary disappearance might explain individual cases, but not the patterns. Why would people planning to disappear leave behind impossible evidence? Why would they walk barefoot in opposite directions, vanish between frames of video, leave belongings on inaccessible cliffs? These are not the behaviors of people planning ordinary disappearances. Some researchers have proposed explanations that venture beyond the conventional. Localized phenomena that science has not yet documented. Certain places might contain properties that affect human perception, behavior, or even physical existence in ways we do not understand. This could explain why disappearances cluster in specific locations and share similar characteristics. Unknown predators or entities that have escaped scientific classification. The wilderness is vast. The oceans are deeper than we have explored. The night is dark. Could something exist in these remote places that we have not yet identified? Something that takes people and leaves behind evidence that confuses investigators. Anomalies in the fabric of reality itself. This sounds like science fiction, but physics continues to reveal that our universe is stranger than intuition suggests. Quantum mechanics describes particles existing in multiple places simultaneously. Theories propose additional dimensions beyond the three we perceive. What we consider impossible may simply be unexplained. We are not endorsing any of these explanations. We are noting that the evidence does not fit conventional frameworks. Something is happening to tourists in remote places around the world. Something that leaves patterns across continents and decades. Something that we do not understand. The families of these missing tourists continue to seek answers. Private investigators, amateur researchers, and dedicated volunteers work on these cases years after official investigations have been closed. They analyze photographs, interview witnesses, and walk the trails where their loved ones were last seen. Most of them find nothing. The wilderness keeps its secrets. The evidence resists interpretation. The questions remain unanswered, but they continue. Because somewhere, Thomas Ashworth might still exist. Nathan Caldwell might still be alive. Emma Lindqvist might still be out there. The Morrison family might still be together. All of these missing people might still be somewhere, in some condition, waiting to be found or remembered or understood. Or they might be gone entirely, taken by something we cannot comprehend, existing now only in the questions they left behind. Every year, millions of tourists travel to remote and beautiful places. They hike mountain trails and kayak still waters and explore ancient ruins. They photograph spectacular landscapes and create memories that will last a lifetime. The vast majority return home safely, their adventures becoming stories they tell for years to come. But a small number do not return. A small number leave behind evidence that makes no sense. A small number join the cases we have examined here, cases that challenge our understanding of what can happen when people leave the familiar and venture into the unknown. We began this investigation by saying we would present the evidence as it was documented. We have done that. The search reports, the witness statements, the photographs and GPS data and drone footage, the belongings found in impossible locations, the footprints that led nowhere, the technology that recorded the impossible. We said we would not tell you what happened to these people. We cannot. No one can. The evidence does not support conclusions. It supports only questions. What is happening to tourists in remote places around the world? Why does the evidence follow such consistent patterns across different continents and decades? What are people walking toward when they vanish? What is leaving their belongings in locations that should be unreachable? Why do trails simply end in the middle of open ground? What did those cameras and drones and GPS devices actually record? These questions do not have answers. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But they deserve to be asked. They deserve to be investigated. They deserve to be considered by anyone who ventures into the wild places of the world. If you travel to unfamiliar places, be aware. Know where you are going. Tell someone your plans. Carry emergency communication. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, leave. Do not investigate the strange sight. Do not walk toward the thing you cannot quite see. Do not follow the impulse that makes no sense. The people we have examined in this investigation were careful, prepared, and experienced. They did everything right. They vanished anyway. You might not be able to prevent what we do not understand, but you can be aware that it exists. You can know that the world contains mysteries that have not been solved. You can understand that the wilderness, beautiful as it is, holds secrets that we have barely begun to comprehend. Travel safely. Document your journeys. Stay in contact with those who love you. And if you experience something you cannot explain, tell someone. Your story might connect to patterns we have not yet identified. Your evidence might help solve mysteries that have remained closed for years. The missing tourists we have examined were all once like you. They were curious, adventurous, eager to see the beautiful places of the world. They set out on journeys that should have been safe, to destinations that should have been welcoming, with equipment that should have protected them. They are gone now. The evidence they left behind has not revealed where they went or what happened to them, but their stories remain. Their questions remain. Their mysteries remain. And somewhere out there, in the mountains and forests and waters of the world, the phenomenon that took them continues to exist. Whatever it is, thank you for watching all 3 parts of this investigation. If you found these cases as disturbing as we do, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We will continue examining disappearances that do not fit conventional explanations. We will continue asking the questions that need to be asked. Share this video with someone who travels. These cases deserve attention. These families deserve answers, even if those answers may never come. And if you have experienced something in your travels that you cannot explain, tell us about it in the comments. You might not be alone. Your experience might connect to patterns we have not yet identified. The world is stranger than we know. The wilderness keeps secrets we have not yet uncovered. The questions remain. We will see you in the next investigation. Stay safe out there. You never know what is waiting.